Joining us now for this conversation is Congressman Jim Renacci of Ohio. Good to have you with us. We also have Steve's charts ahead.
We're getting to it. But Congressman, we found a fiscal conservative. So we brought you in. You actually did vote against the biggest spending bill of all time that nobody read.
Yeah. Well, again, when you get a bill the night before and it's 2,200 pages, it's difficult for me to vote for something like that. It was kind of funny as I was walking out of the Capitol, one of the reporters walked up to me and said, "Did you know such and such was in a bill?" I go, "Look, I'm not sure what all was in a bill," and that was one of the reasons. Well, there were some good things in there were some bad things, but in the end, I can't read that fast.
So that's what we conservatives have always complained about. Don't give us bills that we can't even read to see what's in there, and yet that's what the Republican leadership is doing. Why?
Well, look, Republicans, Democrats, both have done it. It's a problem. It came down to not being able to get something done in time, so they pushed it through. There was 4 or 5 people that negotiated. In the end, it's very difficult for somebody who's representing, 1/16 of Ohio to just say, well, okay, I'm going to go along with it. I was a business guy for almost 3 decades. I'm the type of person who wants to see it, read it, understand it before I vote for it.
Do you understand the president's tariff plans?
Well, I understand what he's doing. As he said, we just can't wait any longer. So, again, remember, Ohio has a lot of issues when it relates to tariff. We have steel. We need to make sure that our steel industry is growing. But we also have, we have agriculture, which is an issue.
Right.
We have manufacturing. So I'm glad to see, look, this president casts a large net out there, and then he pulls it back in. And these are negotiations that are going on. I know people get a little uncomfortable.
So you think they're just, you think he's just sort of negotiating now, too, right?
I think it's a starting point. You'll see at the end. Remember, when the tariffs first came out, there was a big shock, and then now we've pulled it back. We've excluded China, we've excluded Canada, we've excluded Mexico. We're starting to pull things back. But in the end, we do have a problem with China, and we've got to do something there.
So, Steve, take us through your charts on the trade issue with China. What exactly is the issue?
So, look, I think we would all agree that we have a trade problem with China and with some other places. I think the lead-in that you read in terms of how this unfolded, and I would say, Congressman, I think the way this has been handled is pretty much about as bad a way as you can handle a serious problem. So let's take a look at the problem, and let's start with China. Joe mentioned that Trump doesn't always tell the truth about these things, so we'll show you some facts. So first, if you go all the way back to the 1980s, we essentially had no trade with China. It was a very closed economy. And then in 2001, they were admitted to the World Trade Organization and got preferential tariff treatments on their goods and services. And so what happened from there was basically our imports exploded, our exports went up a little bit, and that $500 billion deficit that Trump talked about is actually $375 billion.
All right, so Steve, but explain the imports and explain what that line means when it comes to low-cost goods for American consumers when they go into Walmart.
Well, this is one of the things people forget about in this current debate where they talk about the price of soybeans and how bad it is for North Dakota, all of which I'm very sympathetic to. But would you like to pay $100 more for your iPhone? Because if we go down this road and keep putting tariffs on imports, these 25% tariffs or whatever, that's what's going to happen. So we've had an enormous benefit from low-cost Chinese goods, but it's come at a high cost in terms of a $375 billion deficit and lots of lost jobs in important places like China. If you take a look at the overall situation, you'll see that China is the biggest part of our problem. They are 50% of our trade deficit, but they are not the only part of our problem. Mexico, which the president likes to go after, is actually only 10%, which is the same size as Germany at 10% and Japan at 8%. So China is the biggest part of the problem, but we have a broader trade problem, which results from a whole bunch of stuff that we have not done.
Again, though, when you say problem, that problem results in, again, lower costs to American consumers. There's a reason why we are importing goods from China and other countries, because we can get them into our country, and it's cheaper for Americans. It's not cheaper for Chinese. It benefits working class Americans.
So what you're saying, or at least what I would say, is trade is good, should be good for everybody. Trade should create lower cost imports and a chance for countries to export things and create jobs that way. And so trade is great. The problem is when you have unbalanced trade like this and we run these huge deficits, we're essentially, as I'll show you in 1 second, piling up debt. But there are countries like Germany, Switzerland, Japan, that actually run trade surpluses with China, not trade deficits with China, because they have found ways to export more stuff to China, and they've kept their imports at a reasonable level.
Wow. Go ahead, Nick.
So, Congressman, tell us, if you were advising the president now on his he cast a wide net, you said. So how would you win this trade war? What steps would you take next and to avoid the fallout to American workers, but still get some of the problems that we're talking about here fixed?
Well, I think that's what he's doing. I mean, he casts a wide net, then he starts to move, then pull the net back, and we have to do that. We have to look at the effects on the economy. We have to look at the effects on manufacturing. We have to look at the effects on farming that's going on, especially in Ohio. So, in the end,
what's the ideal policy outcome, though, here?
Well, the ideal policy is to have free and fair trade with China, especially China. That's our issue. I mean, China is not fairly trading with us, and I think in the end we have to have free and fair trade. And we could look at some of the other countries that we're talking about here, but in the end, when the biggest part of our trade deficit, 50%, is China, we got to look at it. We can't ignore it. The one thing I will say about this president, he's not ignoring things, and we've had Republicans and Democrats in the past who have ignored some of this stuff, and that's why we've run into this situation we're in.
Steve, what does Germany export that we don't have that we could export to reduce our deficit?
Well, they export things like very sophisticated machine tools that the Chinese need in order to build their industrial.
We don't make those here?
We don't make them as well as Germany does. Germany is really, really good at that. German cars are obviously very, very popular in China. They export a lot of cars. Our cars, are made in China, some of them, but not as popular.
So, Congressman, we started out this segment by noting that you're a fiscal conservative. What do you make of members of his cabinet? Pruitt, Mulvaney, to name a few. Do they seem like fiscal conservatives?
Zinke?
What's
have you minted a gold coin with your likeness on it,
No,
like
but
Zinke?
seriously,
Or
can
do
you speak on the record
have a
about-
flag that's raised over your office when you walk in and lowered when you walk out?
Well, look, all these individuals are following through on the president's agenda. Do I agree with some of the spending? Absolutely not. I mean, again, I ran small business for 28 years. I was as tight as you can be when it came to spending.
Shouldn't they be tight?
What's that?
Shouldn't they be tight
Well,
with
I think we should.
taxpayers'
Well, look,
dollars?
anytime you're spending taxpayer dollars, you should watch what you're spending. And I think I don't know of all those things, but I'm not going to agree with them. I'm not going to agree with some of that spending. Absolutely not. But again, I think in the end they're following through with the president's policy.
Aren't there fiscal conservatives though that can follow through on the president's agenda without wasting taxpayer dollars?
Well, one of the problems we have is members of Congress, House and Senate. First off, we should be passing budgets. We should be passing appropriations bills. We should be tightening the noose down on this spending. That's the problem. We're not doing that. We're not getting a budget passed. We're not getting appropriations bills passed. We're doing it in the House. The Senate's missing the boat many, many times. And in the end, we have to be able to tighten this down. It's our job. And then give them the dollars they can spend. But that's not happening.
Okay.